Hello everybody, we're going to go over the photosynthesis formula to review for our upcoming quiz, and you can also use this for the chapter test or for the final exam in January. So, a couple things, just because we're not in class and having this discussion together, let's add a couple things. So this formula here is representing the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So I'm going to write that. And a couple prompts, a couple things that I have said multiple times in class is what do plants need and what do plants make? And those are referring to the reactants side. That would be what do plants need? The answer to that would be carbon dioxide and water. And then, what do plants make? And that would be glucose and oxygen. One is a stored product, one is a waste product, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So, as we did in class, we connected and related each of these elements in the reactant side to each of these elements in the product side. So I'm going to go kind of in the order we studied them, starting with the light reactions. And if you recall, to start out the light reactions, we had light being absorbed by the photosystems, photosystem 2 to be specific. And some of that light energy was used to split a water molecule. The name for that process was called photolysis. So here's our water molecule, and we have oxygen and hydrogen. So let's think about, step by step, where exactly each of these elements end up. So when water is split apart, we get three products: hydrogen, oxygen, and free electrons. The oxygen is the first to go, right? It ends up leaving the plant through the stomata. So let's draw, and it leaves by itself as pure oxygen. That's why we can use it and breathe it. So oxygen from water leaves the plant as pure O2. So I'm going to draw my arrow over here. And I'm going to make a little note because I just said this is going to leave. So we call that process waste diffusion. And I'm going to add in the exact route it takes by saying out the stomata, the pore in the leaf where gases can enter or leave. Great, one down. So next, our hydrogen. This is a bit more complicated, but we've gone over this several times. We know that the hydrogen builds up in the thylakoid, exits the ATP synthase pump, and eventually hitches a ride on NADPH. Maybe not so difficult is figuring out where it ends up on the right side over here. So, because there's only one H. So, that's easy enough to draw my arrow to the hydrogen. And then, to remind myself how I got there, I'm going to write the molecule that took it, NADPH. We've called this the taxi driver, limo driver, Uber driver, UPS driver, all of the above, whatever helps you remember it most. This is a transport molecule though. Okay, so that takes care of the light reactions, and just to remind us of that, I'm going to write that underneath here. This is consumed during the light reactions. Next up, we got to figure out where our CO2 ends up. So let's do the more difficult one first, the oxygen. And this is really only difficult if you're starting from scratch, because we've already explained this oxygen has to have come from the water, because this is the only situation that produces pure oxygen. Also, carbon dioxide hasn't entered into our process yet, so this oxygen produced as a waste product of the light reactions couldn't possibly have come from CO2 that hasn't entered into the process yet. So with all that being said, this oxygen and this carbon are going to be the other two components of glucose. So I'm going to draw this over here. And here, let me update my color coding of my last couple transfers to make sure we see everything clearly. And then we've got our carbon that also ends up as part of glucose. Okay, so the dark reactions, which take CO2 and the hydrogen from the light reactions and combine them all together to make glucose, happens pretty quickly. So let me mark here dark reactions. And really, in terms of our chapter, our material, we only need to know one more thing, and that would be which worker, enzyme, particle product makes glucose. So the enzyme is called Rubisco. We've talked about that. So we're going to write in here Rubisco assembles glucose. Here's the glucose molecule. Rubisco is, like I said, an enzyme, a protein that takes the components, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, and makes them into glucose. So there you have it. That is the photosynthesis formula. Hope you find that helpful, and study hard.